who is the person that's most susceptible to this? Because I mean, I think like my theory is that if you've already got, are in deep on some type of fundamentalist religion, making that shift over to Q or into some deep spiritual, it doesn't necessarily have to be a, organized religion, that your mode of thought is open to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to, since Emma mentioned the religious aspect earlier, I mean, it is huge. The overlap between evangelical Christianity and especially Pentecostalism and QAnon is huge from what I've seen. I mean, when I go to these QAnon events, they'll do these, very charismatic religious things. They'll do the altar calls. People will do speaking in tongues. And I think, an aspect of that is this idea of modern day apostles or prophets. So you have these people who say, well, my prophecy is that Donald Trump will be elected in 2016 or these various things. And so if you already buy into that, it doesn't seem like that big a leap for a lot of these people to then say, well, maybe there is this Q guy who is, sort of telling me about the secret war with the devil. So I mean, the religious thing is huge. Initially, people getting into QAnon tended to be kind of like a Trump rally crowd, older, whiter, because it was so focused on Trump. But especially with the pandemic, when people got, more people were sort of looking for answers and they had a lot more time online, we start seeing it sort of spread out into younger people, more people of color, more women. So really, at this point, it's often someone who maybe already has something a little weird going on with them, and then they hear about QAnon and then they get all in.
There's the Satanism is fascinating too, because I also think you can connect it to how there's the demonization of trans people right now. There are demons among us. They're trying to go after your kids, make them trans, make them gay, and there's this kind of artificial morality ascribed to like a mission and into belief against fact that you can also tie into, Jesus is coming any day now. Not to make this like a anti-religion thing, but when you go far down that rabbit hole, it's the search for signs. And they've just kind of copy and pasted that onto Donald Trump as the savior in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, they really see that it's so key to the QAnon belief system, and really like religion like we've been talking about, is just right next to that. I mean, you hear people who get into QAnon because of their religion, or people who are brought to Christianity by QAnon, who are not in a church, and then they start hearing so much about the devil and Jesus and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's so key to the QAnon belief system that like the devil is a real guy, a real force, and he's out there in the world and he has these agents. And it's your job as a QAnon believer and as a Christian to, you are on the front lines, you are fighting here. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think QAnon has played a significant role in the trans panic and this backlash to LGBT rights, to say that, this idea that they're after the children, I think fits right into that.
How much of a role did Jeffrey Epstein or like what was his impact on like the Q phenomena, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was huge for recruiting people in. I mean, even before the charges that culminated in his death, he was kind of a foundational story in QAnon. And then after he died, and look, I'm not saying there wasn't anything weird to that. I mean, when he died, I thought, like, how dumb do they think we are? I mean, I don't know what happened, but it looked really suspicious. And obviously a lot of people thought that way. And I think for some of those people, that then was used as a gateway into QAnon, where these QAnon believers would say, well, don't you think it's messed up that, Jeffrey Epstein did this? And of course, people would say, of course. And they say, well, let me tell you about the cabal. And so it goes from there.
Well, he's Jewish too, right? That helps, right? That helps the conspiracy theory.
Well, but I think what it does show, though, is like on a structural level, like what QAnon does for its adherents. Like you have this thing with Epstein, and I think like a lot of people had the exact same reaction that you did, which is like, seriously? Like the cameras were off, and I mean, I have deep suspicions as to what happened there. But because there's no answer, sometimes it's just like too hard to sort of troll around and live with something that is not resolved. And on some level, Q, it was one of the things that comes in and provides an answer for that question and other questions. I mean, in that way, it functions a lot like religion.
Yeah, I mean, I think when they do studies of people who are susceptible to conspiracy theories, it is often this inability to sort of deal with unanswered questions or contradictions. And QAnon and other conspiracy theories offer a much simpler way of viewing the world, and one that I think can be empowering in some ways, even as it's disempowering in others. Because it says, with the pandemic, for example, or Jeffrey Epstein, rather than there are all these complex factors, there are all these things we don't know. It's just this is a group of guys who did it. They're at fault.
So, as a political force, where is Q now? Do we have any type of data on how many of these people vote? How many of these people I think it's a problem, and I think answer that question. I get some other questions about where this places in history, but do we have a sense of as a political force, how big of a deal it is?
Yeah, so looking at polls, and I like to take sort of the most conservative ones in terms of not some of the tenets of QAnon, but for people who say yes, I believe in QAnon, they rate between 3% and 7% of respondents. That's millions of people, and when you expand it out to do world elites run a satanic cabal that abuses children, that gets much bigger, and that's in the teens of people saying yes. Now, Q in late December 2020 told his followers to stop identifying so openly as QAnon believers, because I think they were getting banned from social media. The brand had kind of become tarnished. But I think in many ways, QAnon has succeeded in getting this conspiratorial idea of, world elites out to abuse children, maybe through the LGBT rights movement. This idea that the election was stolen, a lot of that stuff has really become mainstreamed in the GOP. And in terms of QAnon itself, Donald Trump is signaling to them constantly on Truth Social. He's posting memes about QAnon and how great it is. So in 2024, I think we might see it surge back. And the one thing I'd add is, he's also gearing up to call Ron DeSantis a pedophile. Trump is sort of laying the groundwork for that. So I could see that fitting right in with a sort of QAnon resurgence.
Do we have a historical, have we had phenomena like this in history where there was this much of an adherence? Look, I could make the argument that Opus Dei is not terribly different from this. And we have, I think it was Scalia was Opus Dei, and I think maybe Alito might be. And it's possible Thomas, in terms of reporting. I think there's arguments that, certain religions that are out there also have some pretty wacky ideas that are, but do we have any historical precedents for this?
Yeah, obviously there have been movements based on conspiracy theories before, and certainly elite groups like Opus Dei. But I don't think there's anything with sort of this broad, certainly in American history, this sort of broad base of support that is, not just they believe in conspiracy theories, but they have this moment called the storm that is their big fascist moment where Donald Trump takes over the country. And, everyone lives in utopia if you didn't get sent to Guantanamo Bay. And so, I don't think there is anything like that really sort of activates people and says, you need to
except
bring
for
about
Christianity.
I was going to say that's the rapture.
Second coming,
yeah,
right? Except for the original version of that, which a huge, it seems to be people subscribing to, but there's no there's no sort of there hasn't been a similar sort of are there divisions within Q? Are we starting to see Q denominations?
Oh yeah. Oh, this is some of the most fascinating stuff about it is this. There are all these kind of, as you say, there's kind of mainline QAnon, and then there's the JFK Jr. crew, and then there's sort of the more extreme JFK Jr. crew, and there's the just people who see symbols and numbers and letters and all this kind of stuff. And what's fascinating is how they all hate each other. And they say, we are the serious QAnon people. We're the patriot researchers. These guys are making us look like idiots.
But they're all election deniers, right? In the end, that's what this is. This is what it's become. QAnon is becoming the election denier movement within the Republican Party, which I think is a way to launder the conspiracy kind of thinking for electoral purposes, to kind of go back to what Sam was saying there. But that part of looking for numbers and signs and stuff underneath the surface is fascinating to me, because like all good conspiracy theories, it does provide a simple solution and bad people to answer life's questions and make people feel better. But what it also does is it activates the conspiracy theorists as people who are agents of change in and of themselves. They're little detectives looking for blood libel in this instance or pedophilia in this instance. Like, how much of that is a sense of when you speak to people who are in QAnon, the fact that they have agency over their own lives in politics in particular?
Yeah, I mean, they love it. I mean, it gives you this sense of, that the real truth of the world, as one guy said, that I know the news before it happens. And so even if you have, whether you're kind of a marginal existence or you're just kind of a mundane one that you're bored with, I mean, QAnon gives you this status. It gives you a community. And as you said, I mean, you can go, they call it baking because the breadcrumbs. And so you can kind of go into the clues and research them. And then if you find a particularly good bake, as it were, an explanation for the clues, you're valorized, and you can even make a lot of money, depending how prominent you get in QAnon.